because, you know, sometimes I would say we should put troops in there, and then another time I'd say no, and yet because it might not be the right thing to do, but we've backed off the rest of the world in a way, in a lot of ways, and I'm very disappointed in that.
Have you joined any veteran organizations?
Let me say no, that I'm not a joiner. The people who are around, like locally, they know of me, so they try to get me in the American Legion and things like that. And I have no interest in being in there. The one thing that I do, I'm not even a full member yet. There is I'll call it a secret society of flyers that was formed by the group, including Eddie Rickenbacker, after World War I. And they're all flyers and all different things. They're not all military, but an awful lot of them are. And the process of joining them is a long process, and I'm working on that now. And they are called the Quiet Birdmen, the QBs. And it's something you don't hear about, but it would be, because their activities are secret. And it's only a matter, they don't do anything as a mission. It's a matter of once a month they get together and have dinner and social together, and that's it. But they're all pilots. They all have a lot of flying time. And I'm almost ready to go into that. But I guess one of the things was having a reunion every year. You could say I belong to something. It's at our we went overseas with 150 pilots, and we believe there are 6 of us left. But when we have a reunion, all the second, third generations come, and the last time, well, the last 2 times we had 4th generations at the reunions. Like this last one, we had almost 50 people at the reunion. And, of course, we have a few airmen, or NCOs, rather. But, as I said, there are only 6 pilots that are left. And 4 of us were able to get to this reunion.
Is there anything else you'd like to add that hasn't been covered? How it affected your life?
No. You know, there are probably a lot of little stories I could tell, but probably wouldn't be of real interest in this situation. But my family, my wife and I did things together, and we did them with the kids. And so we, like after I retired from Yukon, we were so busy, we used to say you'd never find time to go to work. We were both downhill skiers. We were both bowlers. She had a house full of trophies. And we were golfers, and we played in mixed leagues. And one year at Willimantic, she was the club champion of the women. So we did all these things together. And so there was no need to join anything else. And so, you know, again, how do you get together with the right woman and then be married for 65 years and not have any regrets as far as something you did? But one thing I would add, I still fly. 4 years ago, I got to fly the PT-7 trainer. That's a biplane sitting there, which was the airplane I learned to fly. And I hadn't been in it for 68 years, and I got in and I could fly it. And I had a ball. And then and that afternoon, I got to fly in an AT-6. And I had flown a lot. The AT-6 trainer was such a fantastic airplane. The Air Force kept them in use, and we used them for instrument training and instrument checks, because we would have a big hood, you put it in the back seat, and the guy would have to sit there under the hood and do the instrument flying. And I was an instrument instructor, so I flew this airplane a lot. And that afternoon I got to fly that. And then the next year I got to fly a PT-19, which I had never flown. In fact, I had never seen one. I knew what it was, but I'd never been in a place where there was one. And as an example, I was so excited about flying this thing, when I came home I built a model of it, and that's it right there. That little blue and yellow thing. So I'm still in aviation. We have contests. I fly competition. This last summer when we were outdoors at the different meets, I won a first place. And they all look at that old man beat me. The others weren't quite so good. I got a couple of seconds and a third place, but I still do. We fly in the wintertime. We fly little indoor models. And last year in one of the events we fly, I got a second place with flying an airplane that by design wasn't as capable as the guy who won. So I knew, but I just flew it so I could fly in the event. And we fly in a high school gym in Glastonbury. And so I'm still active with that. Not having to join a unit like the American Legion or the foreign wars. Most of us are retired now, flying model airplanes, but every two times a month we meet for breakfast, and last time we had 19 people there for breakfast. So we every couple of weeks, you could say, we have get-togethers, and those are all model builders. No, I guess one guy is not a model builder. He doesn't build models, but he worked for Pratt & Whitney. So he did a lot of work for them that included a lot of work in the sales division as well as manufacturing. So he likes to hear us talk about stories, and we like to hear him. I suppose I would say something about World War II in that we didn't have much opposition over Japan. When we got there, there had already been P-51 groups flying over Japan, escorting the B-29s, and doing a ground support, going over airfields, trying to get airplanes on the ground. But the Japs weren't coming up very much because we were told by intelligence that they were saving their airplanes so they would have something when the invasion came, because they knew it was coming. And we knew it was coming. Iwo was going to be one of the medical evacuations, and we had a great, great big hospital with all kinds of staff. I mean, specialists from all over the country were there. And so we knew it was coming. And the day they dropped the bomb, we cheered. I guess one of the things I would say was, like when I was a fighter pilot, the day before the armistice was signed, all fighting had stopped. I mean, we'd already got the ceasefire. And the B-29s were loaded with supplies, and they were going to drop them at the camps where the Americans were prisoners. So they would have food and clothing and bedding and stuff. But when we got to Japan, we never completed the mission. But our group commander, who was one of the great commanders I worked for, and I always say that, I knew him, he was my commander in Fort Myers. I went overseas with him, and I never ever heard anyone ever say a word against him. And that's really something, because you can't love everybody. He had said that the group, if there's someone who feels that they don't want to make the flight to escort the 29s, you don't have to go. The war is over, and depending what your feelings are. So a lot of people didn't go. So I had an assistant flight commander. The reason I had an assistant was, with our long-range missions, we were double-strength pilots in case we had to fly on consecutive days. So he flew with half of my flight, and I flew with the other half. And so Frank and I, we talked about it. We decided neither of us were scheduled. We said, well, we'll go. So we got to go, and we got in position as the last two people in the last flight of the last squadron. Because when we got to Japan, we were going to leave the squadron because they didn't need us, because there was no opposition. And we were going to go down to Hiroshima and Nagasaki and look the place over. If we did that and we got caught, we would have been court-martialed. But we were both pretty wild. So we didn't get to do it, because when we got to Japan, one of these solid fronts was right on the coast. The B-29s couldn't even go through and drop their supplies. So what we did was we got to go sightseeing, and we flew up and down the streets of Tokyo. And there's no way, even when you see pictures, you can't imagine how that was. The only thing you could see, you could identify where the roads were in the city. Down near the docks, there were a couple of buildings, the brick buildings, that the fire didn't take out, but they were just shells anyway. And it must have been pretty bad if you were on the ground. So there again, I was lucky. They kept me from goofing off that day.
Well, thank you so much again for your service and
Oh.
part of this interview. This is amazing. Thank you so much for talking.
Well, you know, even though I knew it was coming, it was hard to think about what would someone be interested in. You know, because my part, the war part, was very little. The rest of my career was supporting, and but I was lucky. You know, most people complain about the service, and I got to go places and do things. Like when I went to Madrid, was when we were building the air bases there. And not many people got to do that. But I was still on flying status, so I could. I want to tell you one thing that happened. I had runway trouble in Thailand. And I had a solution. but I didn't have the money. And they had told, when they put this runway down, the Assistant Secretary of Defense in the Air Force had said that if you put the runway down, that's the end of it. We're not going to replace it. But they put it down anyway because they needed it right now. And then it started to fail. And I was there when it was failing. And we set up and did all kinds of stuff. And I got all pictures, color slides. And when I couldn't get help, I took a leave. Now in Thailand, we could, even during the war, we could get a leave while we were in Thailand because we weren't under the command of the people in Saigon. And I got the excuse to come back because my son was graduating from OCS in the Marine Corps. And so I got back to Washington, and I went into the engineering headquarters in Washington, and the commander of it is a two-star general, and he's not there. He's out on a trip. So his assistant is also a two-star general, and there's a guy who was my sponsor when I went to Madrid. And we used to fly together because I was the check pilot, and I used to give him his check rides. So I told him I had this problem, and I wondered if it's possible to get together with his pavement engineers and make a presentation. And he said, "Oh, we can do better than that. Today is staff meeting. I'm ready to go into a staff meeting." He said, "After the staff meeting, I'll keep the whole staff there, and you can make your presentation." So I did it, and they agreed with me. And so when the next time people came from Washington to NKP was the name of the base I was at, the nickname of it. So when they were going to come to NKP, the Assistant Secretary of Defense for Logistics was there. And when they left, after they looked at our problem, they said, "Okay, you got your project." And so we got the runway done. If we hadn't done that, they would not have flown off that runway the next rainy season. And so they were lucky as well as me being lucky. But it's let me say, it's fun talking about the career because, as you can tell, I had so many great things happen. We had our taxiway there was instead of being paved was the old World War II Pierce plank, and that was what we had as a taxiway. So what I did, I got a project to repair it, and we tore it up and we put down a paved taxiway. So when they were working on the runway, they would have a place to take the airplanes off. They used the taxiway as runway. The other thing was in trying to get the work done, when I was told the project was approved, I had already stockpiled on the base $500,000 worth of rock to build a new runway. And I figured, maybe what I did was illegal, but when they find out that if I hadn't done it, they wouldn't have a runway, I guess it was all right. It's not like spending the money for a swimming pool. But those kinds of things happened to me in my whole career. In fact, when we bought the rock, had to be hauled over about 100 miles of dirt roads because there was no mountains, there was no rock on our part of Thailand. The only rock was across the river, the Mekong River. We were right along the river. The other side, we could see these mountains are all the limestone we needed, but there was no way to get there. So they had to come in by road. So we set up an order and bought it. And so no one else got in trouble. I signed the work orders, and But I figured I'd had a good career. If they were going to kick me out, that was all right. But at least they had a runway the next year. And I guess things like that happened. And a lot of it was timing. I had an experience with this type of runway because I had been in a staff engineer in the Tactical Air Warfare Center in Florida, in Eglin Air Force Base. And there, we actually bought some of this matting, which was developed by the Navy engineers, and we got enough so we could put down a little runway out on the sand out on one of our airstrips. So I had already had experience with it and what it could do and everything. And initially, when it was put down incorrectly, and that's why it was failing. But you look at it and you say, well, you know, anybody could have been sent there, but I was the one who had experience with this matting. And I keep talking about these things because they happened all my life. And I suppose in some way you asked me about stress, and I suppose a lot of these things would be stressful, but my idea was it either works or it doesn't. So if somebody says no, then it's their fault if something happens. So I guess I just had the right attitude for the jobs I got. Oh, let me see. In my saying that I flew for 20 years with all kinds of aircraft, I actually ended up flying 27 different kinds. And for one time I got to go as the acting command pilot for the mission. I went on the B-29 Navigator, and then I was the one would make the decisions on the weather or any changing in the mission. And so I got to fly B-29 as a command pilot.
Did you have a favorite plane that you flew?
Yeah, P-51 Mustang. There's nothing in the world like it. Anything you want to do in an airplane, you can do in that airplane. Oh. And I flew a lot of fighters. I flew P-39s, P-40s, P-47s. I got more time in P-47s than I do in a Mustang. I must have 1,000 hours in P-47s. But it doesn't even compare with the Mustang. And one day though, it got me in trouble. I used to do the test flying. When we had something major done on an airplane, I would take it up and check it out. And that started when we were training in Fort Myers. That was something that worked on an airplane. Then one of the instructors would take it up before we put a student in it. And so I got to do all the test flying. And when I was in Thailand, we were waiting to go up to Iwo. One day the group commander had to go to a meeting, and the meeting was across in the other island in Saipan, is where the headquarters was. And I had taken up, and it was a check on the supercharger, so that you'd have to go all the way to 35,000 feet to make sure the supercharger is working. So when it was time to come home, I just rolled it over, and I went down between the tents and where we lived and pulled up to get over the commander's tent, and then took off. And the only thing that was wrong was they had canceled the meeting and the commander was in his tent. So I was taken off the promotion list and had to wait for the next list. But I guess when you're flying fighters, you're doing everything alone, and you get carried away. As a result of that, we had an airplane that was out of commission, so when the squadron the group flew up to Iwo, I had to stay back and wait for this airplane and then fly it up to Iwo. And that I think that too. I'm just trying to think of the things that might come up. One thing as a follow-on is that when we were in training in Fort Myers, Florida, the group was the 53rd Group. And then later I mentioned I was in the Tactical Air Warfare Center. Well, I was sent to that job, and when they formed the unit, it was a brand new organization, and we had a special mission to do. And now the complex in Florida is a major research and development section, and they have been redesignating. Instead of having all separate things, they now have combined everything into one thing. They call it the 53rd Wing, and it includes the 53rd Wing, which I started out in, and then the Tactical Air Warfare Center is now part of that, and they have sub-commands all over. They have in Nevada and Omaha, and they have a big operation in Tyndall, which is, what's the name of the town? Doesn't come right away, but it's, let me say, 50 miles east of Eglin Air Force Base. Tyndall Air Force Base, but I don't get the name of the town. But anyway, they have an historian in the 53rd Group, which is headed by a general, and this historian is a character in himself. He was in the Army, and he was a helicopter pilot, and he had 4 helicopter tours in Vietnam. And his main job was to go into the fight and pick up the injured and bring them out. And he had 4 tours of that. So he's quite a character, you can imagine. And so he was looking for information about previous commanders of the 53rd. And when he got in the area of finding out about our commander, Colonel Harper, my name came up, so he checked, and sure enough, I was available. So they invited me down, and I spent 8 days there, and my daughter was able to come with me. She was a school teacher. She was out of school, and she came, and for 8 days we were scheduled every minute, including breakfast and dinner. And we went all over the place giving presentations, and which were presentations like today, but where there was an interchange, because the people were able to talk to us as well as we talking to them. And so I had quite a time. That was quite a trip.